Movies and stories we love are gateways to see ourselves and God in new ways.
Every great story borrows its power from a larger story, the story that's written on our hearts and woven into the fabric of our very being.
I've seen death. I've seen my friends, my men being killed. And it doesn't take too many days of that, and you change dramatically.
We was hungry, we had no food, we didn't have much ammunition, it was cold, we didn't have any clothes, you couldn't build a fire. If you build a fire, some crazy thing would shoot at you.
Everywhere you would look, you would see dead people, a dead soldier there, here, ours, theirs. Then civilians besides, dead animals. So death was all over.
You don't have a chance when your friends go down, to really take care of them as you might, and especially if you're in an attack, moving or whatever. And I withstood it well, but I had a lot of trouble in later life because those events would come back, and you never forget them.
Hello, and welcome to the Men at the Movies podcast. My name is Paul McDonald, and we're continuing with our Band of Brothers series with episode 7, The Breaking Point. And joining me for this discussion of this episode and how it applies to our masculine initiation and journey and the practical implications of it is Britt Mooney. Hey, Britt, how you doing, man?
I'm doing really well. How are you doing?
Good. This is a tough episode.
I've seen it so many times.
Hashtag understatement.
Yeah, hashtag understatement. But I've seen really the whole Band of Brothers several times. And there are some moments in these that are cringy. I mean, just you just tense up, you're just like, yeah. Especially now that I know where the moments are. And of course, this is on Netflix now for those people who are, I don't know if it'll still be on.
I watch it on Max.
You watch it on Max?
It's everywhere.
But
now.
So is the Pacific. And I've only rewatched the Pacific once. The Pacific is worse. It has way more of those moments to me, like just so disturbing and so. And of course, I'm a history major enough to know the difference between the two. As bad as the war in Europe was, it was even worse and horrific in Japan, in the Pacific. So, but yeah, so this is a tough episode, but I think this was my first choice when you,
I think so. Yeah.
When you asked, just mainly because of the conversation at the end. But really, the whole episode is so full of good, just really good principles for us to talk about, I think.
Yeah. And I do this every once in a while. I like just sort of doing a cold open with a direct quote from the movie, from the scene. And those are the guys who lived through this. We've gone from Bastogne, the freezing cold winter. It even ended like on Christmas with the demand to surrender there, where I believe it was Eisenhower's response was nuts. Like basically you give him the finger back in the 40s. And so this one, I wrote down, this is January 2nd.
Right.
This is when this one starts. So this is basically a week after Bastogne, still freezing cold, still miserable, still undersupplied. Still all the things we talked about last time with Brian, and that list of things, where the men are still under fire, they're still spread thin, they're still alone, isolated, there's no hope of resupply. And Brian and I talked about the power of presence in that moment. And so today we're even more kind of going in to this idea. And I wrote down this, and I think it was from the very end of the scene. They have these quotes sometimes, but this idea that every man suffered, men unhit by shrapnel and bullets were nevertheless casualties. And so as we are sort of describing our journey and applying this series to our lives, that idea of the question that we wrestle with is, well, how do we handle it when the trauma happens, when the big stuff happens? And today we're going to look at a couple different, basically, as I like to do, look at 3 different guys. We're going to look at how Buck Compton responds, how Lieutenant Dike responds, if you want to call it a response. And then really the superhero, the hero of the story here is First Sergeant Lipton, and how he responds. And so to kick this off, I want to read something. And it's so funny to me, Britt, and you and I do this enough that we've seen this happen enough, where the morning of a podcast, I will read something in the Bible that was like, oh, this is perfect for what we're going to talk about. And the days that sometimes I don't read my Bible until after our podcast, I was like, oh man, this would have been perfect to bring up in the podcast. So today I was reading in 1 Peter 5, and Peter's writing, he says, and this is in the Message version, I have a special concern for you church leaders. I know what it's like to be a leader, in on Christ's sufferings as well as the coming glory. Here's my concern, that you care for God's flock with all the diligence of a shepherd, not because you have to, but because you want to please God, not calculating what you can get out of it, but acting spontaneously, not bossily telling others what to do, but tenderly showing them the way. When God, who is the best shepherd of all, comes out in the open with his rule, he'll see that you've done it right and commend you lavishly. So be content with who you are and don't put on airs. God's strong hand is on you. He'll promote you at the right time. Live carefree before God. He is most careful with you. So we're going to see how all that applies to what we're talking about, especially with First Sergeant Lipton here in this story. But I think we need an orientation. The first thing, we need to understand the time that we're in. If we look at the Bible or the bigger story as a play, we're sort of towards the end of Act 3. We're getting ready for the big finish for, if you're wanting to phrase it, the return of Jesus. Right. But when we prayed before we started, that was my closing of my prayer was, come quickly, Lord Jesus, because Amen. We see a world in suffering. We see a world in trauma, and it piles up. And we know that the only rescue is in Jesus. It's not politics. It's not government. It's not, society, whatever. What we need is Jesus. And the reason that both Bastogne and Breaking Point are so powerful to me is it's a picture of sort of the enemy's response. If we consider Christianity as the allied front, what happens towards the end of the battle as Germany is retreating? They're down to their last defense. They push everything they can into a massive offensive called the Battle of the Bulge. And that's, as Christians, we think we live in an age of comfort, and Britt, you and I talk about this all the time, the idea that a comfortable life is not really a Christian life. And Peter even just talked about it. He's like, as leaders, we are in on the suffering as well as the glories. So we are in an age where the enemy knows his time is growing short. So there is chaos around us. There is trauma around us. There is things that will bring you to tears. And we'll see some of that in episode 9 here in a couple weeks when we talk about why we fight.
Right.
But this idea, so there's this scene. So when, again, the orientation, we're in an age where our faith, our peace, our trust is under attack. Our hearts. Because I think it's in Revelation where it talks about at the end times, many people's hearts will grow cold. Mm-hmm. And in the past 20 years, this is a longitudinal study by Barna, I think, like a reputable survey people. And they said over 50% of Christians in the Western world have no longer believe in Christianity. The hearts of many will grow cold. And especially in this one where there's snow and everybody's cold, I drank a cup of tea just to warm myself up as we're preparing for this conversation. So I wanted to jump in with a quick clip and then Britt, sort of have you launch the conversation on the other side. So we see one of the soldiers coming back, and they're in line getting some hot chow. But they're going around and basically going through each member of Easy Company and saying, these are the injuries that these guys have. So again, going back to that idea, men unhit by shrapnel and bullets were nevertheless casualties. We don't escape the battle unscathed. So the question we will try to answer today is, what are we going to do about it?
Hey, fellas, look who I found.
Hey, Joe Toy,
Hey, Rick,
back
how
for
are
more.
you?
How are you, Joe?
Yeah, doing pretty good. Escaped from the aid station.
Where'd you get hit?
What's that?
It's web placement.
Really? Thought of some guy I've known for 2 years and I forgot his face.
Joe got hit in the arm. New Year's Eve gift from the Luftwaffe.
Jesus.
A lot of you guys been injured?
It's called wounded, Peanut. Injured's when you fall out of a tree or something.
Don't worry. There's enough crap flying around here, you're bound to get dinged sometime. Almost every single one of these guys has been hit at least once. Except for Allie, he's a two-timer. He landed on broken glass in Normandy and got peppered by a potato masher in Holland.
You'll find out, son.
A bull, he got a piece of exploding tank in Holland. Now George Love's here. Has never been hit. You're one lucky bastard.
Takes one to know one, Skip.
Consider us blessed. Now lead guy, a skinny little guy, he got pinked to the neck in Holland. And right next to him, that other skinny little guy, that's Popeye. He got shot in his scrawny little butt in Normandy.
And, Buck got shot in his rather large butt in Holland.
Yeah, kind of an Easy Company tradition, getting shot in the ass.
Hey, even First Sergeant Lipton over there. He got a couple pieces of a tank shell burst in Carentan. One chunk in the face, another chunk almost took out his nuts.
What was nuts like?
Doing fine, Bill. Nicely to ask.
Yeah, so a couple things as we get into this. My mentor, Larry Chandler, used to say, we haven't been invited on a cruise ship. We've been recruited on a battleship. And a lot of Christians get disillusioned or discouraged when they show up for the party and they're given a weapon and God's trying to teach you how to load the cannons and or swab the deck. Actually, that's where you start. If we want to be consistent with
You're handed a broom or a mop.
You're handed the broom or a mop. If we want to stay consistent with this episode and the theme, and you're told to start serving people, and loving people, and getting into the mess with them, and also, if you want to use a metaphor from the episode, checking in on people in their foxholes, not waiting on them to come to you, but you go to them and check on them in their foxholes. And so because of the reality that the war already exists. God's not inviting us into a war to start a war. We're not picking a fight. The fight has been picked already. We're already in the middle of one. And we went over this, we should do more of this, like podcasts are like, go check out this episode. But like, go check out the Die Hard episode. Like, we're already in a war. We're just ignorant of it. And part of the revelation of the gospel part of it is revealing we're in a war and the devil is out to kill you. And so that's why, for me, a lot of these war movies have a lot of insight, because the scripture talks about. I was even reading about it today in one of the first songs from Moses after the Red Sea is Yahweh is a warrior. Yahweh is a man of war. Yahweh is his name. Like, and we look at Jesus in Revelation, and like there's a lot of war imagery here with God, because he's not fighting to hurt people. He's fighting to try to save people. He's fighting with love. He's fighting, but there is an enemy who is out to get us. And so, all that being said, we shouldn't be surprised when we get attacked. And we shouldn't be surprised when we get wounded, not injured. It's not an accident.
Didn't fall out of a tree, Peanut.
You didn't fall out of a tree. And as we call him the Podfather, as Alan Arnold says, it feels personal because it is.
Yeah.
Because he really is after you. The devil really is after you. If some of these attacks in your life feel targeted to you, like they say at one point, like we can't even in the beginning there, the clip you played at the very, very beginning, we couldn't even start a fire or they shoot at the fire. Like
right.
we weren't allowed any comfort. The guys from, I don't know, what was it, this one or was it one of the episodes? By the way, I've just watched all 10 episodes so I might get a little mixed up here, but where they come back in to the line and some of the other American soldiers have crapped in their foxholes,
right.
And it's like, oh my gosh, you just you just can't get a moment's rest. And that wears on you. And this is this is Christian reality. And a good leader and as men, we are all leaders. You lead somebody. You may not know who it is, and as we'll see in this episode, you may not know who it is. But we are all leading somebody. We are all being watched. We are all being accounted for in some way. That how will we lead and take initiative in this reality, because there's a world of broken people. And at church, you can tell people everything's fine on Sunday, but when you really get to know people, everybody's dealing with something. They've all got something that they're dealing with, and the only way you're going to know is if you check in their foxhole. It's the only way you're going to know.
Well, I love that you brought up the fact that like soldiers, like allies, people on your side took a dump in their foxhole.
Right.
Like you can't even depend on guys who are on your side. And you're right, because in that scene as they're going around, you wouldn't know any of those guys had been injured. You wouldn't know the wounds that they had taken. I'm sorry, they've been wounded. And I love that, even that idea that wounds are inflicted with intentionality, with purpose. And this episode really is the start of a 3-episode arc in this one, where we sort of see how to care for those who have been wounded, who have been under attack, who have been under trauma. Our next episode, we'll talk sort of about what to do when we are the ones who are taken out, who are tired of the battle, who have, as I think Paul says, who have grown weary. Like we see men who have grown weary of doing good. And then in the 9th episode, we'll actually sort of complete that arc and say, this is how you keep heart. Because as you said, the battle, all these external battles that we face, these things that we face, are all attacks against our heart and our relationship and union with God. And that's what has to be protected. In Proverbs 4, guard your heart, for from it flow the well springs of life. Mm-hmm. Life flows from our heart. If our hearts are the temple of God, that means God dwells in our heart.
Good.
So we need to protect that union, and everything that the enemy throws at us, depression, anxiety, unemployment, loss of kids, loss of wife, loss of parents, the losses, the wounds that we take, yes, they're terrible. They're hard to deal with. And how we respond is much more important. Are we going to respond by, as Peter said, do I trust that can I be carefree with my heart because God is careful with me? And I don't mean carefree. Like that's a tension, right? I was like, what are you talking about, Paul? You just said guard your heart, but you can be carefree with it. Yes, both are true.
Both.
Like
That's
in
how
this
you
episode,
can. That's
we
how
see
you can be
Spears.
carefree.
You see
That's how you
Spears
can be
running through the
carefree.
battlefield, and then he runs
Right.
back and doesn't get hit. He is taking the attack to the enemy because he's carefree, but he's in the battle. He's engaged in the battle. And you can go engage in the battle for your friends, for your brothers, for your kids, for your wife, for the people that you care about, while still you are guarding your heart because your confidence and faith and trust in God is not tied to the outcome that you see.
Yeah, that's good. Well, one important thing from that clip too, the conversation begins with Joe Toye arriving, and I think Winters pulled him aside and was like, "What are you doing here? Like,
Oh yeah.
you just got you just got injured." And he's like, "No, I'm okay." And he takes off the wrap on his arm, and we see this several times in the Band of Brothers, and they kind of talk about it, and it becomes an issue with what's his name, Webb or something later
Webster
on.
in the next episode, yeah.
And it becomes an issue with this one character, but these guys would leave the hospital early, but they would escape, quote unquote, the hospital. This is not toxic masculinity. This is how men were created to be. I want to make this very, very clear. You can say a lot of things about that. Masculinity can be toxic, but men will show up injured if they have a reason to. Mm-hmm. If they have a purpose, and the purpose really isn't even for these guys. It's not even killing Germans. It's about being with their brothers and protecting their brothers and watching their brothers' backs. And I think Winters early on in Band of Brothers mentions this, is that they're not really concerned. They're really fighting for each other more than they are fighting the enemy. And that's a very powerful thing to me, because, Popeye comes back and he can't sit down, but he's gonna jump into wherever they're going or whatever happens, like it was before Holland or whatever it was, and so Garnier does it at one point, and they just keep coming back even though they're injured. It's not that bad, but again, the key here is men have to be given something to love and fight for. They have to. You have to do this with men. If you don't, they will kill each other and kill you in the process. That's toxic masculinity. Men were created to have something that they love and will protect at all costs. That's how they were created, and God bless men for this. This is so vitally needed in our culture. They make good husbands, they make good fathers, they make good co-workers, they make good pastors, whatever it might be. That's what we need. And so I love that part of this episode where they bring this out. Yeah, everybody's been injured, but they didn't use it as an excuse to quit. And my point is, you're going to be injured, but unless you have the focus of the mission in your brain and the love of your brothers in your heart, then you will give up when you get wounded. But even if you get wounded, you won't quit. Not because you want to kill people, and not because you want to see people die. You're not glorifying violence, but you have a reason to fight. And I love that part.
Yeah, that's when you talked about toxic masculinity. It reminds me of what either Morgan Snyder quoting Dallas Willard talks about is how the story of most men is being entrusted with power and then using that to harm the people entrusted to our care. Where God is looking for people, for people, men and women, but our target audience is men here. So for men to care for, to whom he can entrust the kingdom. And so we're going to talk about these three different men here. And because you see loss, obviously, you see loss of Hubler shoots him. He gets a Luger that he's been waiting for the whole war. Ever since he was deployed, he'd been looking for a Luger, gets it, shoots himself in the leg and bleeds out. You see Buck, who's confronted by law. He gets, as we talked about a couple episodes ago about the Dear Buck letter, where he gets his girlfriend breaks up with him. Mm-hmm. He's lost. And then his friends who he cares about, he watches them get hit. He watches them get hurt, removed. One guy loses his leg and he becomes, he checks out. He can't do it anymore. And so I want to talk a little bit about Buck, and I'll play the clip here where Lipton, and this is Lipton narrating a lot of this episode, because as men, we see it. It's almost like when I was a manager, one of my problems I said was I cared too much because I felt so helpless to deal with any of the real things. Like I couldn't, as much as I tried, I couldn't fix the schedule overnight. I couldn't fix this problem. I couldn't fix a lot of the staff's problems just because of the nature of the beast. And I cared too much. It weighed too heavily on my heart because I felt helpless, felt hopeless. I felt like I wasn't doing them, sir. Like it wasn't good. And that's, I think what we see with Buck is those were his friends. And how do you respond when your friends are the ones that get taken out or anybody? And what we see here is what a lot of us do. We sort of go into our shell, we disengage. We're like, I can't do this anymore. Just make it stop.
On the report, it said Compton was being taken off the line because of a bad case of trench foot. Didn't say anything about him losing his friends. Buck was a great combat leader. He was wounded in Normandy, and again in Holland. He received the Silver Star for his part in taking out those German guns on D-Day. He took everything the Krauts could throw at him time and again.
Lieutenant Compton, UCLA did not make the Rose Bowl this winter, probably because you weren't there. I'm sure you're teaching all of your young soldiers the joy you have of the sport. Gosh, how we all know what an exciting young man you are, and how your heart and love.
I guess he just couldn't take seeing his friends Tori and Garnier all torn up like that. No one ever thought any less of him for it.
Yeah, man.
Hang on. So that scene where you hear, that was Malarkey's voice, and he was reading him a letter and he just couldn't take it anymore. Mm-hmm. And you hear him, Lipton, saying he got injured here. He got wounded here. He got wounded there. And we can take our wounds and we'd be fine. Like, yeah, we're a lot of times, even as men, we're like, yeah, come at me. Don't come at my wife. Don't come at my kids. So when your wife is depressed and can't get out of bed, when your kid suddenly questions their gender, when they get drunk and are not going to church, when you feel like they've been taken out of the mission, of the purpose, of the calling that you see for them, when your best friends from 20 years get divorced, like you're like, I can handle it when it's me. But when it's my friends, that really shakes the foundation of my relationship with God. That really makes me say, God, what's going on? God, are you there? And the beautiful thing I loved about that, and then I'll flip it over to you, Britt. The beautiful thing I loved is at the end, Lipton said, none of us thought any less of him.
Right.
And I had a friend of mine last night at our fire. He was telling me about this story, and he was telling his wife, he's like, I'm going to tell you something that's going to make you mad. And I need you to be vulnerable because I'm sharing you an attack that I went through. And I'm there's nothing to worry about. Like, our relationship is strong. There's no mistrust. Everything's sort of great in their marriage. He's like, I'm sharing you an attack I went through, and I need you to be vulnerable. And she came back and she told him, she's like, it's interesting. I never looked at it that way before. And he's like, I just told you a lot of stuff. What exactly are you talking about? And she said, I've as you were telling me what was going on in your mind, I felt myself getting angry and defensive. But then I realized that that's not a response that I want as your wife, because why am I getting mad at you because you're under attack? And a lot of times we blame the person who's being attacked like they're weak, like they can't handle it, when really we need to engage with them and understand what it's like to be under attack, because we all, as Paul says, because we know that the saints all over the world are suffering the same way.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead, buddy. that was like, yep, I'm done.
Yes, that's good. So it starts with Buck because he gets wounded, and we meet Buck as this happy-go-lucky guy on, I think, the second episode.
Yep.
And we meet him as this happy-go-lucky guy. And, something happens to us when we get wounded and attacked the first time. There's a natural maturation process as a believer, as a disciple. Young men, fathers, right? Little children. I write to you, little children. I write to you, young men. There is a spiritual maturation as well. And, teenagers and, I think up until you're in your early 20s probably, and men especially, but I think it happens to young women too. You feel you're invulnerable to life. Like you just,
right.
It's like you're immortal. And I had it, and I see my kids have it. Like they just don't think about stuff. And of course you can go, but then you go the other direction where I see old people and they don't want to even like go upstairs because they could fall and break a hip or something. Like, like
you see all the bad results that might happen.
You can go on these different extremes where what I see in Buck is, and it doesn't say it this way, but it seems like he was a happy-go-lucky guy, and he saw a lot of people do, so a lot of stuff happen through D-Day especially. But when he gets wounded, like now it's like, oh, well, maybe I'm not invulnerable. Maybe, you start to question. And so you see him kind of dealing from fear, because he keeps telling everybody, like, don't do anything stupid. Like, just, don't right. Like he's kind of, and even the other soldiers are like, okay, we won't, but even they sort of see that he's not the same. But then there's kind of this cumulative effect too with trauma. Like you can handle some trauma, and then you can handle a little bit more. And then when he finally sees his fears realized, which is Garnier and Toye, these two seemingly indestructible soldiers,
mm-hmm.
when he sees them wounded, it just pushes him right over the edge. And I agree with you. That line, none of us judged him for it. None of us blamed him. We all understood it, because even though they might be dealing with it for now, they understand the trauma and the hardship of seeing their friends, their buddies, their brothers dying. And I'm with you, man. I think that we so often we see people fall and that we thought were, and walk away from God, who we thought were, we thought they were in. We thought they were like, they were rock stars. At least they seemed like it, and then usually something happens. And generally speaking, what usually happens, and this isn't true for everybody, but a lot of times what happens is there's a tragedy that occurs, and they blame God. They think God should not have done this, should not have allowed this to happen. And then this emotional search comes about where they're trying to figure out, or maybe it's a series of things, and I've had conversations with these people, and it's just this wound in them that the enemy takes to raise questions and doubts and fears, and and then they become atheists like it's the intelligent thing to do. But it's like, no, really, it came down to
God
your
didn't do what I wanted.
Your dad died when you were 17.
Yeah.
He just didn't wake up. And he was 50 and in perfect health. And it was a shock and a surprise to you. And you were very close to your dad. And now what? Well, how do you deal with that? And so like you're saying, like, I'm not judging people as if like, oh, how dare you, you're weak to struggle with that. But man, you see stuff happen to people, and for me, man, I've seen people, fall and look at me, and they come out of the closet that they're an atheist all of a sudden, like it's like this, it's like they're coming out of the closet, like, I think I need to tell you. And it's just like, and you start going through it, and it's heartbreaking. I mean, I've had those moments where it's just like, I go home and I cry, and I'm like, what the heck? Like, I thought they were one of us, sort of like they were a Christian. I thought they were a believer.
And we're experiencing
maybe they were,
technical
it depends on your theology on all that, I guess. But,
and what you
we
see
just,
is it's not that they don't want to believe in it's not that they don't believe in God. They just don't want to, because they've been hurt by God. They don't trust him. They're like, wait, you told me, like in Proverbs, I have to guard my heart, and I can't trust it with you, God, because you keep hurting it. You took my son away. You took my dad away. You took my daughter, my wife, somebody that was close to you died. And
what happened?
I don't know. You just cut out mid-sentence. So I was sort of riffing so I could splice it back, and then you can come back in. But talking about how the idea that it's not that they don't believe in God, they just don't want to anymore. And C.S. Lewis felt this way after he prayed, and his mom didn't. First he prayed as a young man, and his mom got better. That increased his faith. Then he prayed, and his mom didn't get better, and she died, and he lost his faith. He became what he called an atheist, because I don't want to live in a world where God is like this.
Right.
And that's where we have to guard our hearts. That's where we have to say, God, this hurts. This sucks. I'm going to trust you in it. And there might be times when we do have to take a break, where we do have to say, you know what? I need to cut back on what I'm doing. I can't still fight the fight that I've been fighting because I've been wounded.
Right.
As a nurse, there's this idea of the secondary traumatic stress disorder, where it's like the healers are wounded by offering healing. And I don't remember if I talked about that last week with Bastogne or not. But the same thing when we're leading, when we're ministering, we take the wounds that we see other people take because we care about them. Unless you're like Lieutenant Dike. But what I see in Lieutenant Dike is another response to what he sees the traumatic world around him. And we enjoy making fun of Dike. I kind of felt towards Dike the way that I did when I would watch The Office. It's like, man, I hope I'm not a manager like Michael Scott is. Man, I hope I'm not a leader like Lieutenant Dike is, because what we see him, he's pretty clueless. He's checked out. He's really only cares about protecting himself, doesn't really care about his men. And he's very easy to mock. But how many of us end up working 60, 70 hours a week because it's easier to be successful at work than that freaking mess that we have at home? We'd rather go out and play a round of golf than to have a difficult conversation about how mediocre our marriage is and what we need to do to get a better marriage. To have a hard conversation with your kids, you're like, I don't really want to do that. I would rather not have that conversation and have them still hang around in this weird little relationship we have than to tell my son actually how I feel and risk him going away.
Well, Dike's problem was, I think, rooted more in, this was a stepping stone in a career.
Yeah.
He came from, was it West Point or something? No, I don't know.
That's next week.
But he came from, but he was related to somebody. It was nepotism or something. He was, something. So they were just, this was a rung in the ladder for him. And so that is the danger to me. That's the danger of Dike's perspective and the way he looks at things and the way he does things is, if you had asked him if he cared, I mean, like oh, Hobbler died, too bad. I mean, like he's not completely emotionless. He just wasn't invested in the moment.
Yeah.
And that's not leadership, and it's not really even good management. I mean, like he was absent mainly because he was looking ahead to a different reality for himself. And so,
going back to what Peter said, not calculating what you can get out of it, but acting spontaneously. And he was not good spontaneously or otherwise.
Yeah. And there's one of the moments I was talking about before we recorded. The difference between Lipton and Dike is in the moment, the breaking point when Toye and Garnier, when they both get injured and they're shelling and it's chaotic and it's like a living hell, man. It was just awful. Lipton, who's I guess the company first sergeant or whoever, like he's got leadership among the non-coms, right? But he's not an officer. And he's running toward the battle. He's running toward the chaos. He's running into hell on earth, where Dike is so freaked out that he's like, I'm going to go get us, support or whatever, reinforcements, or I'm going to go get help.
I'm going to go somewhere that's not under attack.
And so Jesus talks about the hired hand. There's a good shepherd and there's a hired hand. The good shepherd cares about the sheep and protects the sheep and goes after the one who leaves the 99. Like, there's all this stuff about the good shepherd in the Old and the New Testament, and Jesus is just sort of diving more into it. He said, but the hired hand, when he's challenged or when there's danger, it's not his sheep. So he just darts. He's out.
The first sign of danger, he's gone.
He does not do
what David does. He does not fight the lion and the bear.
He does not do what David does. And so he's not a man after God's own heart. He said, but I'm the good shepherd, right? That's Jesus's whole point. But so many leaders are hired. They have the mentality of hired hands.
Right.
And that's Dike's problem, is he has the mentality of a hired hand. He doesn't have ownership. Lipton has been with these guys since the very first day at Currahee.
He's a Tekoa man.
And Tekoa, he's been there he feels ownership in this. He is not looking to get ahead. He is simply looking to do whatever he can to encourage the men and to make sure they survive and to do anything he can without any sort of consideration for his own, maybe not well-being, but definitely not his own profit, as it were. Like, he's not trying to profit off of this. He's not trying to become whatever the next rung on the ladder is.
Promotion, right?
He's not shooting for the promotion. He is shooting for simple service. And Jesus says that is how you win in the kingdom. That's how you win. Who's going to be great in the kingdom? I tell you who's going to be great. Who's a servant of all. It's not going to be like it is in the world. And we see this, and it never really says this, but you almost get this sort of idea, because at some point Lipton starts smoking and Winter's like, I never thought I'd see you smoke. I mean, almost like he's kind of a believer too, maybe like kind of like Winters, but never really goes into that. But anyway, so it's just a very Christ-like way of leadership that Lipton continually shows throughout the whole episode. And I love it.
And again, going back to the verses from 2 Peter, that you care for God's flock with all the diligence of a shepherd. And that's what we see with Lipton. And we're going to start diving into Lipton here. that we see the hired hand of Dike. First sign of trouble, he's out. He's not invested. And we see, and I'm going to call it, and I'm not, again, we're not criticizing Buck for being taken out, but he becomes incapable of carrying on his mission because he lets the traumas and the wounds of war sort of take him out. You know, in our spiritualization, we'd say he's separated from trusting in God. He can't trust God anymore because of the trauma and injuries and wounds that he's seen the people that he cared about take. But we know that Lipton, in this application, he is a shepherd. He shepherds the flock God has given to him. And we're all called to shepherd the flock that God has given us. It might be the flock of ourselves, right? It could be
it always begins there. It always begins there.
It could be our friends. It could be the where you are in the workplace. There are certain people, again, entrusted to your care. How are you shepherding their hearts through this, through the trauma that comes? I love you brought up that scene where he starts smoking, where he and Lutz are in the foxhole and that dud hits. And when I was in Iraq, we'd get mortared, and you'd hear an alarm or something. I remember one time a dud actually landed about 75 feet from where we were sleeping. And our sergeant comes in, and I'm sleeping because I'm working night shift, and this is during the day. And he comes in and yells, "Get up, get down, get your shit on." And if I was at that, I rolled out of my cot onto the floor, but I'm thinking, I was like, wait, which one do you want me to do? Those are three. But I remember another night where we're in this bunker, and it's sort of like those concrete dividers that you see on the interstate. You know, they're sort of tapered up, and then there's a concrete sort of barrier across the top. So you had to crawl in, and we're sitting there, and you could hear sort of thumps going off in the distance, sort of like when you're in a thunderstorm. And then one thumped really close, and everybody in that bunker just lit up and started smoking. And it reminded me of that scene when that dud hits, and there's like, it's like, "Give me a smoke." He's like, "I didn't think you smoked." He's like, "I don't, but I do now."
I do. Right.
And so, Britt, to head for home, you listed, and together we came up with 11 ways where First Sergeant Lipton cared for his men, shepherded his men. And so what I want to do, Britt, is look at each one of those 11 super briefly, because we're, at the 50-minute mark now. So I want to look at each one of those and then just say, hey, this is what he did in this movie. This is how we can do this for the people that are entrusted to our care. Does that make sense?
Yeah, right. So, yeah, and that's kind of one of the main points of the episode is we are in a war, we are in darkness, we are in the winter in a lot of ways. We're in this broken world, and but we're on a mission. And how can we, like you said, even if it's leading ourselves, but it's not going to be just ourselves. We have people around us somewhere. I just was writing down because this whole contrast between Lipton and Dike was just kept hitting me. Lipton, first, he's helping Shifty with the foxhole.
All right. Again, so how does
that's one of the first scenes.
So how does that? How can we do that for the people, or how can we do that ourselves? How can we emulate? How can we emulate Lipton in our lives with this action?
It's simply reinforcing your own protections against the world. Like this generation, like you talked about, like this, be saved from this evil generation. Acts 2 or 3 or whatever. Peter's first sermon in Acts is, what do we do? Repent, be baptized, and be saved from this wicked generation. Like you have to put those barriers up in your life to be aware that you're going to get attacked. And so, but he's helping somebody else do that instead of doing it for himself. He's dying to himself in that sense. So how can we do that? How can we encourage others and help others to, not try to lead them into comfort, or quote unquote happiness. I'm not saying God doesn't want us to be happy, but I'm just saying the goal isn't happiness. The goal is purpose and meaning, and happiness is a byproduct of that.
Right.
And so number 2, Lipton makes the report about Hobb, not Dike. Like, so he reports to Winters, I think, right, about how Hubler died, Hubler, but it was really Dike's job. But what he didn't do was say, "Oh, it's somebody else's job. Screw it."
He took
if it doesn't
responsibility,
get done.
right?
He took responsibility,
Said,
even
well,
if somebody
I was there. I thought I'd give you the firsthand account, even though, as he said, it was Dike's job to begin with.
So how many times can we do that? How many times can we say, "Well, okay, it might be somebody else's job to stand in the gap here, but they're not doing it."
Yeah.
So somebody needs to. And
the phrase I think of is, "I take care of my side of the street." I can't take care of everybody. I can't control what you do with everybody else. I can do what I have control over.
Right. But I'm also thinking of that one video we shared a long time ago with about the men. They were having all these discipline problems at this high school, and it was these dads got together and was like, "We're just going to start patrolling the school," and the discipline problems changed like that. It wasn't for their own individual kids; it was for the whole community that they decided to be a father to some degree and have a positive impact. Number 3, Lipton, they're complaining about Dike, and Lipton comes into this foxhole with a bunch of the Toccoa men are just complaining about how awful Dike is. And he doesn't put him down. He doesn't say, "Stop that." He doesn't, he says, "Man, I wouldn't want to try to lead a whole bunch of guys like you who are just, kick butt soldiers. And I wouldn't want to do that." And so like he's trying to keep the integrity, protecting the integrity of Dike, even though he agrees, Oh my, I'm sorry. You froze and I was just waiting. I was just waiting on it. I was like,
you just dropped in the middle of, he went in this foxhole with all this Toccoa men.
Okay. He went into the foxhole with all these Toccoa men, and instead of putting them down and giving them an order to shut up, he comes up with this speech about, I wouldn't want to have to try to lead a whole bunch of kick butt soldiers who made it through all this stuff. So he's actually lifting them up while also trying to protect the reputation of Dike, because he knows morale wise, it's not going to help them to complain about this guy. They're not changing this. And so how do we do the same? How do we turn an opportunity for complaining into an opportunity to protect someone's reputation, even when they don't deserve it?
And what he said was, it was about protecting the integrity of the unit.
Yes.
Like, how do I protect them, their belief in our bigger mission, really, regardless of who their company commander was.
The fourth one was, again, helping reinforce foxholes when just previously Dike had told them, "We're not going to be here for long. You don't need to do that." And again, helping one another to reinforce our foxholes.
And I think that mindset is very prevalent. I was like, oh, you don't need to spend all this time praying. You don't need to spend this time reading the Bible. You don't need to spend this time in worship. And I was at a conference recently, and they talked about you sort of have these 4 different levels of engagement, which I think of maintaining our connection and our union with God, which is deepening our foxhole. One is soul care. Take care, take a nap, go for a hike, go for nature, do something that brings your heart alive. And a lot of times we stop there, but that's only one component. There's the other component of study, where you were talking before, Britt, about reading a book and reading these books that sort of, maybe you don't even agree with them theologically, but when you read stuff you don't agree with, that actually strengthens your own faith, because you're like, I don't agree with that. And then you're like, well, why? And then your faith is strengthened by this. And then there's the intimacy aspect, where you listen to worship music, where you're praying, you're engaged in that, in a different practice. And then there's this other where you're sort of engaged in the getting bigger. It's like deep prayers where you're seeing the kingdom, where you're pursuing the kingdom. And like those 4 things together are the work and the practices that it'll take to deepen our foxhole and help others to do the same.
Yeah. Good. Number 5, we've already talked about where Dike leaves during this breaking point and Lipton scrambles to help. Number 6.
Pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah. Lipton. Yeah. I mean, how often do we see trouble and just try to avoid it?
Well, that sounds messy. I don't want to get involved.
That sounds messy. not my clowns, not my circus, whatever. But Lipton, but sometimes we're called to engage. You know, we got to be prayerful about these things and have discernment. You know, sometimes, you know, the Bible does say don't get into certain conversations with fools. It's just, you know, you're going to look like a fool too. You know, like so, you know, there's got to be some spiritual discernment here. But sometimes people are in legitimate need, and are you going to run to the battle, or are you going to run to the problem and try to be at least some level of solution, or are you just going to kind of do your own thing? Number 6, Lipton talks to Buck, who after he's broken, he tries to go talk to him. Again, that's not his job, but that's another example of him stepping up.
He's the first sergeant.
He's the
sergeant over the company. Buck is a platoon leader. So the company is made up of 3 or 4 platoons. Again, like you said, not his job, but when he sees a man hurting, he goes to talk to him. He goes to engage.
Well, and somebody says you should go talk to him. Like somebody even recognizes that Lipton can do these things. Right?
Astrid, no. Quiet.
You froze again. Dude, I'm telling you, it's part of it's Riverside. Like it doesn't do this with Zoom. It doesn't do this with anything else that I do.
Well, I don't even remember this happening ever before. So.
Well, didn't you say something was, but.
Yeah, we had some issues with
Sarah at one point.
Well, that was her internet, I think.
Well, my internet is admittedly not super fast, but.
That shouldn't, I don't know. I don't understand I wonder if it like drops for a second.
It must.
But
it must drop. It must be dropping.
So we were talking about engaging with Buck. Somebody said you should go talk to him.
Oh. So yeah, even somebody recognizes that Lipton should go talk to Buck. Like they don't even try to say, let's go get Dike so he can talk to him. They don't even try. They recognize that Lipton is the leader that they need. They know it. And even if Lipton doesn't, we'll get to that in a second. Number 8, Lipton, because a lot of people are upset, Toye and Garnier are huge parts of the company. They're core members of this group. And so Malarkey is feeling it too. And so he gives, Malarkey has also been looking for a Luger for his brother. Mm-hmm. So Lipton gives Hoobs, whatever, gives that Luger to him. And again, but that's personal. You don't know that unless you know people.
Right.
And you got to, I'm using the metaphor, you got to get into people's foxholes, but you got to check in on people and know them if you're going to bless them in a way that is legitimate, that
and meaningful,
speaks to, and it's meaningful. Lipton, at one point, and we've kind of talked about this, the drop in the morale is dangerous. He talks about how that's a really dangerous thing. And so they show him going around to foxholes. I've talked about that,
Fucking hell.
And he said, well, they don't have a leader. And he actually says that in his little narration, like, oh, they don't really have a leader. Wow. I can't.
That's crazy, man.
I'm literally sitting right beside the internet here. It's probably me.
Hang on. Nope. That's not what I wanted. All right. So,
all right.
Where were we?
I'm going to do the drop in morale thing again. So we talked about this point. already, number 9. He's checking in on people in their foxholes because he says a drop in morale is really dangerous. And again, this takes an awareness on our part as men that they're the people in our lives, even if it's not our job,
Right.
they need to be checked in on. And we should check in on them and ask them how they're doing and get real answers and spend intentional time. He was very intentional about this. Number 10, Lipton goes to talk to Winters about how, so they're about to go attack the town of Foy finally, and Dike is going to be really put in charge at that point. Like, he's going to have to lead these men
Going
in battle.
into combat. Yep.
And they're going into combat, and Lipton, as a good leader, knows this is going to get people killed, and so he goes to his commander. He doesn't gossip about it to everybody else. He goes to Winters, and because he knows Winters will understand, and Winters does. We've seen those scenes throughout the episode. But again, he goes through the proper channels and to the authorities, and he's like, "Look, this is a bad idea." And
which I think is
his...
interesting. It's an interesting comparison from the first episode when they're concerned about Sobel, but they resign their commission.
Right.
He's not, they take the easy way out, right? He's actually going through the proper channels this time as he's matured and had become a leader and a shepherd. So he's got the balls to, the nuts are good. Thanks for asking. He's got the balls to go talk to Winters instead of sort of taking the coward's way out and just like, I'm resigning my responsibilities because this is a bad situation. He's stepping up, even though there's nothing they can do about it. But he's like, I just want this on the record.
Yeah. Well, and he cared enough about his men that he had to try at least give, he had to be a voice for others. And that's part of being a good leader. But he wasn't doing it to be a good leader. He's doing it because he loved them.
Right.
And he cared about them. And finally, so the combat in Foy happens, Dike freezes, they get spears instead. As part of it's a great scene there towards the end with spears, and the battle seems like it's over, but then there's a sniper they didn't get, and they're taking pictures like the battle is over, and they got to get this sniper. And so the sniper takes out a couple guys, and they're all hiding now, and they need somebody. Shifty is the guy who's the marksman, and they need somebody to be bait, right? Mm-hmm. And so therefore he's bait. He doesn't send Lipton is bait. He decides, I'm going to be bait. I'm going to be the distraction. So the sniper will shoot at me so you can see where he is and take him out. He doesn't send a private to do it. He doesn't send somebody else. He does it himself. And again, it's about taking personal responsibility. Like, no, I will do this. I will take the sacrifice. I'll take the hit because it's for the good of others. It's not so you can, think I'm awesome about my humility or that I'm self-sacrificial and, here's a card. I'm the most, self-sacrificing guy on the team. No, he's doing it because it needs to be done. And so he does it. He puts himself in danger instead of somebody else. And
because a delay
and so
would
all
cause
this leads
greater harm to be done to the people that he cares about.
Right. So all this leads up to this last conversation because Spears, Dike is relieved of command. Winters relieves him of command, and Spears, who is from Dog Company, a different company, but I think he's a platoon leader of that company. And he basically is given Dike's command in the middle of the battle, which just goes to show Winters, support, and his good leadership, because he's been thinking about it for the whole episode. How can we get this guy? What can we do? And then so the final scene of the episode is they're in this convent, and it's a very spiritual sort of environment, right? The nuns are singing, and Spears and Lipton have this conversation at the end.
These men aren't really concerned about the stories. They're just glad to have you as our CO. They're happy to have a good leader again.
Well, from what I've heard, they've always had one. I've been told there's always been one man they could count on. Let him into the Black Jack, held them together when they had the crap shelled out of them in the woods. Every day kept the spirits up, kept the men focused, gave them direction. All the things a good combat leader does.
At the end of this clip, I'm going to read this thing about humility that was Peterson's thought on.
You don't have any idea who I'm talking about, do you?
Okay.
No, sir.
Hell, it was you for a sergeant. Ever since Winters made battalion, you've been the leader of Easy Company. Oh. And you're not going to be first sergeant much longer, first sergeant. Winters put in for a battlefield commission, and Sink approved on your behalf. You should get the official nod in a few days. Congratulations, Lieutenant.
And going back again to 1 Peter 5. So be content with who you are and don't put on airs. God's strong hand is on you. He'll promote you at the right time. Live carefree before God. He is most careful with you. And I'm reading this in the Message Devotional Bible. So there's Eugene Peterson wrote a little kind of a study piece of this. He talks about how humble people lead. The most important quality that good leaders need to develop is humility. Humility has nothing to do with weakness. When we humble ourselves, we operate from a position of strength. We know that we're loved by God and that He calls us to love others. We also know that other people are loved by God and are therefore objects of our concern. When we become leaders, then, it is simply to lead people to God and to share His love with them. Humble people are confident people, for they know that God is the rock under their feet. Lipton was confident. Humble people are knowledgeable people, for they know that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. Lipton was pretty knowledgeable. Humble people are strong people, for they do all things through Christ who strengthens them. Again, strength. It takes strength to go in and engage in those positions, in those situations. Humble people are leaders, but it's the way they lead that distinguishes them. Instead of leading like a hard-driving cowboy prodding cattle, they lead like a gentle shepherd tending his sheep.
Yeah, the first time I saw this episode, again, 2000, I watched this episode and I just started crying because I'm like, God showed me that there are a lot of people who are going to get to heaven and God's going to say, no, you're up here. You're not back there. You're up here. And they're going to say, what did I do? And He's going to say, you have no idea what you did, do you? Because it wasn't about them.
Yeah.
It wasn't about themselves. It was about others. And because you made it about others in the right way and with the right heart, God's going to give those people great reward. The Bible talks about giving people great reward. This is how you get it. How do you become great in the kingdom? You're a servant. How do you become the greatest? You're a slave. Like,
you take
this
the
is how
lowest
you
seat
do
at the
it.
table.
You take the lowest seat at the table and wait for the master to say, no, 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 no.
And it's not taking the lowest seat out of, look at me, I'm taking the lowest seat. It's taking the lowest seat and being absolutely content being at the table that God gave you.
Right. And so there's also the parable or the teaching of the sheep and the goats. Lord, Lord, when did we see you naked and clothe you? Because He said, when you did it to these, you did it to me. He goes, when I was naked, you clothed me. He says, you get a reward. When did we see you like this? When you served the least of these. This is the kingdom. This is the gospel of the kingdom. The poor will have the good news preached to them. Yes, that's people who are poor in heart, but it's also the actual poor. It's actually the people who just need stuff. And you decide, I'm going to go help them just because they need stuff, not so I can get something out of it, not so I can have a great ministry and have a great podcast, not so I can do anything cool, but just because they need something, I'm going to give them. I'm going to give them my time. And that can be emotional, physical, whatever, spiritual needs, any sort of need. This is what you do. I mean, when you do that, it's Jesus counts it as if you did it to him, for him. He identifies with the poor. That's what that scripture is saying. It's just saying, I identify with the people of most need. I was born, if you don't remember, this is Christmas, or Christmas just happened, I guess, when this episode comes out. But
it's going to be like end of February when this comes out.
All right. But we just had Christmas a couple months ago. And if you remember, he was in a manger, in a cave. Of course he identifies with the poor. He was born into poverty in this world. Like, you don't think he understands the struggles of what people are going through? And so I'm telling you, like, there's so many people who are going to get to heaven, and he's going to say, well, when I was like this, you did nothing. You yawned and was like, not my problem. Not my job, even though it really was. And there are going to be people who are like, even though it's not my job, even though I don't have to do this, I'm going to put myself out there and be intentional and serve others and love others. And I wept for two reasons. Number one, just because God showed me just his heart in that, just the beauty of Lipton's character, of how selfless he was and how amazing that is, but also because sometimes I am called to lead people. And sometimes I'm not that selfless. And I need to learn as a husband, as a wife, not as a wife, as a husband, as a father, as a leader, as I'm mentoring creatives or other sort of friendships and people who respect me for my leadership at times and tell me so. Like I need to be that sort of leader, that selfless, that focus not on myself but on others. And I think I've learned some about that, but it's just another reminder to me every time I watch this episode that I still need to press forward in being more like that, you know?
And to give ourselves the grace that even when we feel like we're blowing it, you know, there's a sense that we've done more than we have been. Like, he doesn't recognize the work that he's done. And especially as fathers, as husbands, it's very easy to not recognize the efforts that we've been putting in because we don't see the results. We see like Lipton in that situation, he saw all the losses. And so next week, we're going to talk about episode 8, The Last Patrol. And I think it's really, to me, that's really the low point of the series, because you see a lot of guys who basically have lost their sense of purpose and calling. And so we're going to, episode 9 is going to be great because we're going to talk about how to get out of it. But next week is sort of the low point, but it's important because we're all going to get there regardless of our efforts, just because we have to go there. We have to know, because so that we can help others when they do that. So you don't want to miss it. Next week, we'll be talking with my buddy Andreas, and he's going to offer some awesome insights into that. And we're going to go crazy. And so, so don't miss that. Sorry, I had a bing in my ears in the middle of my talk, and I don't remember where to restart to cut it out. So don't miss next week where my buddy Andreas and I talk about episode 8, The Last Patrol, and how to approach it when we sort of lose heart in a lot of ways. So this has been Paul McDonald and Britt Mooney talking about Band of Brothers, The Breaking Point. And I hope you enjoyed it. And I hope you join us next time here on the Minute the Movies podcast.
Tide has been awakened.